All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. Today we have a very special guest, Professor Robert Lefkowitz, who's the 2012 Chemistry Nobel Laureate, and he's joining us from East Coast of the U.S., right?
Correct. Where at the moment, even though I live in the southern United States, it's just started to snow.
Oh, I heard of the snowstorm. Yeah. All right. And thank you so much for joining us. I'll spend a couple minutes introducing who he is. And then the reason we have this conversation today is Bob actually put out a book. A funny thing happened on the way to Stockholm in Chinese called 去往斯德哥尔摩的路上. To the readers worldwide, and we're lucky to have the Chinese version now. And he is Chancellor Distinguished Professor of Medicine, Professor of Chemistry and Biochemistry at Duke University Medical Center. He's actually been an investigator of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute since the 1976. That's before I was born. And he began his research in the late 1960s and early 70s when there was not a lot of clear understanding of specific receptors for drugs and hormones that even existed. And his group around that time, with very limited technology as available today, spent 15 difficult years developing techniques for labeling the receptors and radioactive drugs, and then purifying the 4 different receptors, and were known and thought to exist for adrenaline, so-called adrenergic receptors. And the reason I want to say that is that because that's a seminal work which lead to his recognition by the Nobel Committee in 2012. And his work later on has basically been the foundation of many drug discovery targets that are familiar with all of us today. So that being said, he's also a very humorous and funny person. I didn't know that before I read your book. And so he put out this book to talk about his life journey, not only as a scientist, but also actually earlier as a physician. And of course, how he grew up, how was his childhood, how his parents, and his own up and downs in his life. A very genuine, authentic, and deeply touching book, I have to say. So with that, I hope you are just as excited as myself in listening to him directly and hearing his stories. So Bob, if I may start with the Nobel Prize, because I think that's where people are saying like they're probably anticipating this conversation. Actually, in the book, in I think chapter 20 or 21, you actually had a very humorous recount of how the Nobel Prize was delivered to you, the news and the entire process of going to Stockholm. Do you mind start there? Like, because I think people heard about all this is the midnight call and all that. How was it for you when the call came?
Well, it's very similar to what you actually hear. So because of the difference in time zones, if you live on the East Coast of the United States, as I do, you get a call at about 5 a.m. Now, just to back up, you may know that the Nobel Prizes are awarded every year. Well, not awarded, but announced every year during the first week of October. Of course, they're not actually awarded until 2 months later on December 10th, which is the anniversary of Albert Nobel's death. Okay, so there's a 2-month period in between. Anyway, I had been touted, if I may use that word, as a potential Nobel Prize winner for many years based on the work that I had done. But years had gone by and I didn't win. Now, the prizes are always awarded or announced in a set order. For example, Monday is physiology or medicine. Tuesday is physics. Wednesday is chemistry. Thursday, I think, is literature, etc. So you know what's coming on any given day. Well, after a number of years of not winning the Nobel Prize, well, let's just say I wasn't staying up by the phone waiting for a call. Okay. Moreover, the day that I got the call was a Wednesday. Okay, so the prize in medicine, which presumably is where I would have gotten the prize if I had gotten the prize, that had happened 2 days ago, and it wasn't me. So I was sleeping soundly on that Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. when the phone rang. Now I sleep with things in my ear so that I will not be awakened during the night. Okay. So I did not hear the phone ring, and my wife answered the phone. And she heard a woman with a Swedish accent ask for Professor Lefkowitz. So I was fast asleep. She gave me an elbow in the ribs, and I woke up and I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "There's a call for you from Stockholm." So immediately, I realized, there's only one reason they could be calling me from Stockholm at 5 a.m. But my mind was racing because this was Wednesday, which is a chemistry day. So I was so surprised. They didn't keep me in suspense very long. Immediately, the woman said, "I'd like to turn you over to Dr. So-and-so, who's the chair of the chemistry award committee of the Nobel Foundation. He's got some good news for you." And so he told me. And so the very first question that I asked was, am I sharing this prize with anybody? Because the prize can be awarded for one person, two persons, or three, but three is the limit. And they immediately told me that I would share it with Professor Brian Kobilka, who is a professor at Stanford. Now, Brian had been a trainee of mine back in the 1980s. He was a research fellow in my laboratory. So immediately, I kind of teared up because, that was so meaningful to me to share this prize with one of my former students. I was just thrilled. And then they explained to me that the announcement wouldn't be made for another hour. And so during that time, I was to tell nobody, not relatives, not friends, not colleagues. And so, of course, I abided by that. I hung up, and here it's, a few minutes after 5. I asked if I could call Brian. They said, give us 10 minutes to tell him. And just as an aside, I learned subsequently that Kobilka thought it was a crank call. He did not think it was serious. He thought somebody was playing a trick on him. And so he hung up. He hung up before they could tell him. But then they called him back and he took it seriously. So here, my wife and I sat at a little bit after 5 a.m. It's dark. We're certainly not going back to sleep. Our minds are racing. I made some coffee. And just my mind was racing around, who am I going to call? Who do I need to tell? And then at about 6 o'clock, the announcement went live. And immediately my phone started ringing. The New York Times, Associated Press, all kinds of outlets, and colleagues who were seeing it began to call. Many of them couldn't get through. My email just lit up. I would receive in the ensuing 2 weeks 1,500 congratulatory emails, all of which I responded to with some help from my secretaries. And I can assure you that the next 2 months were just crazy, getting ready for all the things that one has to do to go to Stockholm, whether it's preparing one's Nobel lecture, whether it's deciding which of a very limited number of guests you're going to bring, preparing an autobiography that they have to have, preparing what's called a banquet speech,
Yeah.
and on and on and on. So that's what that experience was like.
Thank you. And again, in Professor's book, you can actually find a very detailed account of that experience. And you use this very interesting analogy. You said it's feeling like going to a big wedding, right? It's like a
Yes,
wedding.
absolutely. And it goes on for many days. Even though the ceremony is on the 10th of December, you're actually over there in Stockholm for about 10 days, and every day is packed with receptions, parties, lectures, receptions. It's really quite amazing. And you can't appreciate what a focus of attention and importance this event is in Sweden. So, for example, the December 10th is a national holiday, and the events are televised live. So that takes up much of the day because it begins with the ceremonies, and then there's a break for an hour or two, and then there's the Nobel Banquet, which is in a different venue. The entire time we were there, it was frigid, bitter cold, never went above freezing, lots of snow on the ground. But that was great. I mean, it just gave it more authenticity as far as I was concerned. And it's interesting, there are about 1,500 people at the Nobel Banquet. There is a very long central table called the Table of Honor, okay, at which are seated all the laureates, their spouses or significant others, the royal family, members of the government, and other notables. There must be at least 100, if not more people, at that one table. So just imagine how long it is, okay? And then perpendicular to this table are all the other guests. So my whole family were seated at one of those perpendicular tables. And it's just an amazing sight. I mean, I was sitting next to a princess. My wife on the other side of the table was 2 seats removed from the king, and she was sitting next to a prince. So it's really pretty remarkable, actually. So yeah, I mean, as I say, everything is televised, and the custom is that people, the citizenry, who watch everything on TV, have banquets in their own homes. Now, we're in white tie, with
Wow.
tails and the works. The only time in my life, I've been to many black tie events, but never a white tie event. So this is white tie. But they have banquets in their own homes to which they invite friends and relatives. Many of them dress up in formal wear. And so they have their own Nobel Banquet and they watch the ceremony. And in the paper that day, they published the seating arrangement of the Table of Honor. So as the cameras pan over the scene, people at home can say, oh, that's Dr. Lefkowitz. Yeah, right there. That's Dr. Lefkowitz sitting next to Crown Princess Victoria, etc. So it really is pretty amazing, the pomp and the circumstance.
Yeah.
And, for those of us not used to a monarchy, we don't necessarily know all the rules. So it turns out the rule is you're not allowed to stand up unless the king is standing. Well, that's a long time to go. If he's not going to the bathroom, that means you can't either. So I have 5 children. One of my daughters had need to go to the bathroom. So not knowing of this rule, she gets up and starts walking out to go to the bathroom, and immediately, I guess some Swedish woman basically intercepts her and starts berating her, reducing her to tears. So she returned to the table weeping. I, of course, only heard this afterward. And her younger sister, I mean, they're both in their 40s at the time of this event. Her younger sister has a very different personality, very brash, very in your face. So as soon as she hears the story, she says, absolutely ridiculous. We're going to the bathroom. Get up. So two of them get up, apparently, and march out, encountering the same woman. And this time, my younger daughter apparently gave it as good as she got. And this woman slunk away, having been reprimanded by my daughter. But that was not the most amazing thing that happened during that crazy ceremony. So the night before all these events, I was having a private dinner for my entourage, about 20 people. And in the group was my younger daughter, whom I just alluded to, and her then boyfriend, okay, of maybe 5 years. Anyway, toward the end of the dinner, he comes up to me, whispers in my ear, could I step outside? He wants to ask me something. So I have no idea what's on his mind. And we go outside, and I can tell he's a little nervous, which he's usually not. And so I say, Eric, what's wrong? What are you trying to say? He says, well, I would like to ask you for Mara's hand in marriage. I would like to propose to her, but I wanted to get your permission first. So I said, well, first of all, I was shocked. I didn't know anybody did that anymore. But I said to myself, well, I like the guy. They've been going together for 5 years. And hey, she's not getting any younger. So, yeah, I said, that's fine. So then he said, well, I don't want to detract from the spotlight on you. He says, so I'll find a quiet place to do this and it won't disturb any. I said, that's fine. So sure enough, the next day, after the ceremony, after the Nobel Banquet has concluded, most of the attendees are standing in a huge room where we're having cocktails and champagne and some after dinner hors d'oeuvres. At one end of the room is the king and the queen. And each laureate and their partner has 5 or 10 minutes to chit chat with them. I still remember my time was 11:30 p.m. So at 11:30 p.m., my wife and I are ushered over there. We make some small talk. Then we went back and joined our group, which was standing maybe certainly less than 100 feet away from where the king and queen were. Meanwhile, they're all Nobel laureates are around, etc. So while we're standing there talking, all of a sudden, Eric drops to one knee. Oh, by the way, he had asked me not to tell anybody that he was going to propose. And Mara had that's my daughter, had no way this coming. So we're all standing around. Remember, he said he's going to do it in the least obtrusive way. Okay. All of a sudden, he drops to one knee, and everybody looks up, and he starts proposing to her right there. My 13-year-old grandson, who's standing amongst us, whips out his iPhone and takes a video of the whole thing, which we have. So immediately she starts to cry, and everybody in the vicinity, seeing what's going on, breaks into applause, okay? All these Nobel laureates, and we've got all of this on video. And so that was probably the most amazing and surprising thing that sort of happened on that day.
Thank you so much. And if you're just laughing as me, of course, you know, it's joyful and also humorous at the same time, the choice of moment.
I mean, this is after he was saying he was going to do it in the least,
Least obtrusive,
way. I
exactly.
mean, he couldn't have. I mean, everybody applauding and this and that. It was just, oh, the best part of the story is that the king and queen could obviously see this. Okay.
Mm,
And while it
mm.
was going on, I was sort of facing them. And out of the corner of my eye, I was looking up at the king, and you could see that he was watching with a great deal of interest.
Mm.
So it ends. Next thing I know, I see that the king, who's flanked by two attaches, is sending his attache over to talk to me. Attache comes over and says, Dr. Lefkowitz, the king watched what just transpired here with great interest. Can you tell me what just happened? I said, well, this young man has proposed marriage to my daughter, and she has accepted him. He says, oh, thank you. Goes back. Now the whole group is watching the king. And you can see the attaché explaining it to him. He looks over, catches my eye. This is the king. And he goes like this.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Exactly.
Yeah.
The king was in on it. The funny thing is that over dinner, I talked with Crown Princess Victoria. That's his older daughter. She will ascend, Crown Princess, she will ascend to the throne at the appropriate time. Anyway, she's married, which made her husband, who was a commoner, a prince.
Mm.
And he was the one sitting across the way next to my wife. So she was amazingly open. I couldn't believe it. Throughout, I forget how we got into the subject, but she told me the whole story, which I subsequently learned and read more about. Turns out her husband had been her personal trainer and a commoner, okay? And they fell in love, and it was a national scandal because the king was dead set against them getting married. Okay, it was all the papers that everybody talked about, but she's the modern generation. She basically said, to hell with him. I mean, he may be the king, but I'm marrying this guy. So apparently the deal they worked out was that he agreed to give up being a personal trainer. He gave him some kind of job as Minister of Physical Fitness.
You can still have one client.
Yeah, exactly. So he's the Minister of Physical Fitness. The next night, there was another dinner hosted by the king called the Royal Dinner, at which time I had an opportunity to speak with the prince at some length because if you know from looking at my book, I'm very into physical fitness and exercise. And so I talked to him about a lot of this stuff too. But I thought it was kind of fun to have that personal side of the story, put it that way.
Right. Thank you so much. Again, for everybody who's enjoying this conversation, you'll find more details in the book. I think Bob has put called Nobel Week, if I remember clearly, chapter 20 or 21, basically detailing those experiences. And it's just as funny reading it as listening to him. And I know that our time is limited and there are so many stories. I just want to mention a few things because I know none of you probably have read the book as I did. There are a few very interesting facts, many of them actually all over the book. So for example, I learned that Bob was very into pumping iron when he was in high school because he thought that's the way to get girls.
Right.
And also he learned from his dad do quick numbers because his dad was a very successful accountant. And he actually thought his most important role model was his family doctor, their family doctor around that time. And he thought he's going to be a physician until when research popped up and somehow just trapped him. And he used it very nicely. He said a life of two callings, right? So both
Yes.
physical and research. And what, you know, like when I was reading the book, I kept laughing because there are so many funny moments. Professor, just so you know, I had my PhD in molecular biology. So of course I know a lot about GPCR, G protein coupled receptors. That's the area where Professor was awarded the prize. But of course, when I read it, it was in the textbook already, and there, you know, today there are thousands of them. But Professor's work was basically the groundbreaking work identifying that there's such a family, because back then there was only one other protein, which is the rhodopsin in retina, that has a similar seven membrane protein. Anyway, but when he was doing this research, he was really moonlighting. So he was called right-handed doing research when he's not supposed to.
Right.
He was almost fired from being a physician training at Mass General. And I also love how you recounted how you, when you got to Duke, and you basically want to kind of reject the offer, so you have a skyrocketing highest level of asks, and they came back, said, yeah, we say yes to all that. So there are so many funny moments in the book, and I'm too sad we don't have a lot of time to go through, but I do highly recommend everyone a amazing translation, so we will just, as myself, enjoy the story. So with that, my next question is that actually in your last chapter of the book called Art of Mentoring, just so you know, not only Bob was a great scientist, a great academics, a great storyteller, as you can tell, he's also a great mentor to many. So that's why he got 15,000 emails and 1,500 emails, and all those people who succeeded because of his mentorship. And then there are 10 secrets in mentoring. I know we don't have time to cover all of it, but what struck me the most is when you said that your lab has always been the most the lab with the most laughter. That there's very humorous, and then tell us about it, like why, like, and of course we kind of intuitively get it. I mean, when you're laughing, you're happy, right? And you actually made a very astute comment saying it's when you're laughing or when you're happy, you're also the most creative. Can you say more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So as you have gathered, I'm a funny guy. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And being funny more than anything else is just a way of looking at life. I don't tell jokes. Okay. I don't even know any jokes. I just tell stories that are all real, but I see them in a humorous way. And as I mentioned in the book, we laugh a lot in my group. And as you just pointed out, I believe that humor is a great prod to creativity. Why might that be so? Well, let's think about what is humor anyway. Humor is an ability to see things in a different way, to put things together that you might not ordinarily see together, or to see relationships that ordinarily you might not see. And when you think about it, what is the essence of scientific discovery, right? That's what we always say. Scientific discovery is looking at the same thing everybody else is looking at, but seeing it in a different way. And that's exactly what humor is. So, and also think about it. In the moment that I say something funny, there's a brief instant when you get the joke, right? And in that moment, when you get the humor or the punchline, you're making a little discovery. Is that all right? And so the more you do that, the more you kind of strengthen your humor muscles, so to speak. Now, I always tell people that there is one caveat to this, and it's the following. My observation is that there are only two kinds of people: people who are funny and people who aren't funny, okay? And everybody can appreciate humor, right? But not everybody can be funny. And you know what I'm talking about. There's nothing worse than a person who's not funny trying to be funny, right? They just miss it by 5 degrees, right? And it's
Right.
horrible. It's just horrible. So the caveat is this: there's no crime or sin in being an unfunny person. It's okay. A lot of people aren't funny. just don't try to be funny. That's what I say. If you're not funny, don't try to be funny. Okay. That's my piece of advice on that.
Thank you so much. It's a, I know all the, you can tell, and then as you said, you don't tell jokes, but all those stories you've told, you make one laugh. And I remember you talked about how when you guys were moving down to from Boston down to Duke, you have to drive two cars, right, with four kids
Yes,
already back
right.
then. And then two kids used to be in your car, but you were listening to this Watergate hearing for 8 hours a day.
Exactly. Exactly. Nobody wanted to ride with me because their mother in the other car had music, which was fine with me. I wanted to listen to the hearings, and this way I had no kids bothering me. And she kept saying, will you please take some of them back? I mean, they're crawling all over my car. And I said, hey, they want to ride with you. I mean, I can't help that.
Anyway, they're full of stories like so. So make sure you don't miss the book because the book is actually written in very plain. I read English version, very plain English, I would say. But all the stories have this such an authentic but also real twist and making it so interesting. And also, I enjoy how you talked about how your early days of everything, like your early days of being a doctor, where you were, I remember you were saying that was one of your senior start saying like when you're on duty, I can sleep soundly, and basically acknowledging you were a good doctor. But that was when you first
That,
gained confidence.
I was thinking about that just the other day. I don't know why. That was 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
That meant so much to me. What you're referring to is a time when I was a young resident physician and I was on duty late at night, and I was taking care of some patients of a private physician who was one of what we call the attending physicians. And I don't mind telling you, I was damn good. I was first in my class in medical school. I was a really good physician. And anyway, so he was getting ready to go home. And of course, as the resident physician, I didn't get to go home. I slept in the hospital. And so he said to me before he left, Bob, who's on duty tonight? I said, I am. And he looked at me, he said, I really feel good about that. He says, I'm so glad you're in the house tonight. And that just, oh boy, to this day, I think about that and how much that meant to me at the time. It's like, wow, all my life I dreamed of being a doctor. And now this senior guy is acknowledging that he's going to sleep better tonight because his patients are being looked after by me. Wow.
Yeah, thank you. Because I think that's so. I mean, thank you for putting this story out because, of course, now you have Nobel Prize. Everybody kind of look up, you're a big star, but you're so generous in sharing all this sort of the start. Like everybody can relate to. Like you need confidence, you need recognition, right when you're early, and then you also talked about when you first started your lab. All those three people basically are random people that showed up, but and then turned out to be because you're new, but they turned out to be like, star scientists.
Superstars. Everyone went on to be a superstar, but
Right.
people say to me, how are you such a good picker of talent? And I said, I would take any warm body that walks in. I need people to work, but every one of them turned out to be a superstar. I mean, it's just
Right.
absolutely amazing. You talked about these two aspects to my career as a physician and as a scientist. And when I give talks to young people about my career, I often title it, as you said, A Tale of Two Callings. So a calling is a sense, almost a mystical sense, that you were truly destined to do a certain thing. We generally associate the term with clergy, okay? A calling to the cloth, to be a priest or a rabbi, a minister, whatever. But you can experience a calling to anything, okay? And I truly experienced a calling to the practice of medicine when I was just a child. I mean, I knew because of my admiration for my family doctor that I wanted to be just like him. And that was my sole focus in the early years of my education. And I lived that dream. Probably the zenith of it was that comment by that attending physician. I'll sleep better knowing you're in the house tonight. I mean, wow. Yeah, that I lived that dream. I never would have dreamed, though, that anything could have pulled me away. Okay. And yet, once I experienced research and my first success at research, which did not come easy, it didn't totally pull me away from clinical medicine, but it became the main thing that I did. And again, it was not something I decided up here. I was just pulled along into it. So I really have been remarkably fortunate, because the fulfillment and the gratifications of practicing medicine and doing science are very different, very different. So, and they complement each other. They're different kinds of satisfaction. I mean, medicine is, to me, the highest calling you can have in terms of helping people and bringing science to bear on helping people, relieving suffering, and on an occasion, saving a life.
Yeah.
It's not inherently a creative enterprise. It's a humanistic enterprise. And if you feel stirrings of creativity, much more fulfilling to play those out in the research environment, because there, it's funny, in clinical medicine, the goal is basically to do it like everybody else. There are standards of care, okay? If you have this disease, you got hypertension, you do these tests in this order, and then you treat with this drug. If that doesn't work, standards of care. And as long as you follow standards of care, you're safe and you can never be brought up on malpractice. So the goal in medicine essentially is to do it like everybody else. In research, it's the opposite. If you do it like anybody else did, that's called confirming somebody else's data, and you get no credit for it. You have to do it in a different, unique, and creative way. So they really kind of complement each other in terms of the aspects of your personality that they fulfill.
Yeah, but that's what I was reflecting when reading your book, because this too, you can also say they're contradictory, right? Yes, they complement to a certain extent, but they have a very different level of requirement for you at a very deep level. I mean, of course, intellectually it's always there, right? You have to be smart and thinking, but deep down they require different aspects of you. And then you have been a huge advocate for physician scientists. I think I've read many of your op-eds, and of course you're advocates for that. And there is definitely a need for it, where you're all saying more. But I guess at a personal level, isn't that something creating a sense of conflict for yourself, like in terms of the requirements to excel in each area is so different?
Yes, it was very difficult for me, because let's be realistic. You can't be all things to all people at the same time, right? In other words, it doesn't matter how good a physician I was when I was young and doing only clinical medicine. But 20 years later, if I'm spending 80% of my time doing laboratory work and 20% of my time doing clinical medicine, how can I possibly be as good in the clinical arena as somebody who's doing 100%? I don't care how smart I am. It doesn't matter. You can't do it with 20%. Now, an alternative is to sort of do 50-50. And then you can be pretty damn good at both. But you can't be at the top, not with 50%. So somewhere along the line, you have to make a decision as to where you're going to make your major impact and where you're going to really try to excel. It was difficult for me, because for me, one of the most fulfilling and important things in life was mastery. Didn't matter what it was. I wanted to master it. I wanted to be as good as I could be at it, whether it was hitting a baseball or taking care of patients or making discoveries in the lab. But as I realized I was spending more and more time in the laboratory, I realized I was not going to any longer be able to be right at the top and at the best in clinical medicine. That was hard for me to accept, but I did.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, you cannot be everything to everybody at every time, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Exactly.
indeed. At the end of the day, it's a choice. And then that's why I think all your mentees really appreciate you. Again, if you get a copy of the book, make sure you read, well, you should read everything. But the last chapter is about your advice, or I guess your reflection on how to mentor people. And then, as you know a little bit about my background, we do education, and I think you're such a wonderful educator. The way you read people, you give them very tailored advice. But I'm sure during your career, many young people came to you for advice, including your own trainees and others. And then I think the young people are feeling, at least feeling, as if they're living a very bewildering time now. There are so many things going on, so many choices, seems possible. If you were to spare a few advice for them, like who are listening to this live stream, I want some words of wisdom from
Well,
someone.
one thing
Yeah.
I would advise, uh, regardless of whether they're heading for a career in clinical medicine or research, to me, one of the most important and formative things which will contribute to their success is not where they went to school. Okay? Young people seem to think, you know, this school is more prestigious, that school's more prestigious. The key thing is finding mentors. Okay? Because I always tell people the things you really need to learn, you can't look up in a book. I often say, if something is really important, you cannot look it up in a book. Well, then how do you learn it? Experientially. You have to apprentice yourself to somebody who's really good at it. So, because the really important decisions and things and values, nobody can put it into words. For example, you're a scientist. So what are the most important kinds of decisions that a scientist has to make? Well, surely there's absolutely none more important than this. What am I going to work on? What's my problem? In the moment that you decide that, you've pretty much set the upper limit for what you can achieve. If you select a problem which is inherently not that important, it doesn't matter how successfully you solve it and how many papers you write, because nobody will give a damn. On the other hand, if you choose a problem of tremendous importance, but it's so challenging that you have no chance of ever solving it, you'll fail equally. So how do you know to choose problems that are really, really important, but are still within your ken in terms of the potential for you, not somebody else, you, to solve them? Well, nobody can tell you how to do that, but a talented mentor who's done it over and over again can show you. So the way you learn in terms of research is by apprenticing yourself to a mentor like that. And the same thing holds for clinical medicine, okay? So you have to just watch. And I could give you many other examples of the kinds of things that are really important. And, you know, the things that are unimportant, you can look up in a textbook. That's sort of like learning grammar. Well, yeah, you need to know that, okay? But that's not going to decide whether you win a Nobel Prize or whether you're, you know, not even a very good scientist. And in fact, the confirmation of this is that if you look at the, if you will, legacy tree of distinguished scientists, you'll invariably find if a scientist has made great contributions in their career, if you simply ask, who were their mentors, you'll find that they were people who made really big contributions, okay? And if you ask who did those mentors train with, same story. You know, when I was at the NIH, National Institutes of Health, from 1968 to 70, I was part of a program where young physicians were drafted because of the Vietnam War. And some of us went into the public health service and were assigned to the NIH. That program, if you take the peak years of the Vietnam War, which was from 1964 to 72, 8 years, And the program was small, maybe 50, 60 young male physicians a year went to the NIH in that program. 10 of us would go on from that program to win the Nobel Prize eventually. And if you look at those 10 and say, who did they train with? 4 of the 10 trained with a Nobel laureate. And the other 6 of us trained with somebody who trained with a Nobel laureate. That is to say, you don't have to go back any further than a scientific grandparent to find a Nobel laureate. And if you go back even further, and I've published on this, you find one Nobel laureate after another. So this, to me, is consistent with the idea that there are transferable elements in how to do really good science, which you can learn from a mentor, but you can't read it in a book. And so my biggest piece of advice to young people who seek excellence in research or clinical medicine is find yourself one or more really good mentors and work with them for a few years.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things it was remarkable, as you said, when you look back the lineage, right, the research lineage of academics. But on the other hand, if I could challenge that a little bit, is that, you know, for example, your entry into NIH was a bit accidental, to be honest, right? Because you were trying to stay away from the war.
Right.
And if there wasn't that, you know, you probably won't, it's not in a way, of course, it was your choice, right?
Absolutely. And what you say is true, because I had very little to do with even choosing my mentors.
Right.
I didn't know any of this, but I was lucky. And let's not, you know, it's funny, I wrote an essay once, which you might enjoy reading. It was published in the Annual Review of Pharmacology, called A Serendipitous Scientist. One of the Chinese people in my group who read the book, the Chinese translation, and who also read it in English, and by the way, told me that this is an excellent translation. But this person also told me that here and there were words that didn't translate well. And the one word they happened to choose was serendipity.
Yeah.
So, which is a form of luck. But serendipity plays a big role in everyone's life, and certainly in science. And there are ways, I believe, that you can, everybody's life is graced with episodes of serendipity. But a lot of people miss the fact that a serendipitous event has just occurred, and it floats right by them, and they don't get the full value or advantage from it. And there are things that I think you can do to maximize the gifts that serendipity has for us all.
Yeah. And thank you for that. Because I think one of the when I was reading your book, one thing, yes, as you said, you're basically you pointed out many times in your book, so, oh, I have no idea, like this just happened. And then as if with the 3 students you have, right? So it's not you planned. And there was this notion recently, also actually a name of a book called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, meaning like many things actually happen to you. But that doesn't mean, well, maybe as a young person listening to, oh, like then there's nothing I can do. Like, I don't know, like luck, I can't plan for luck, right? I can't do, but I think your book actually also told the true secrets behind how do you be more ready for serendipity. Is I think through your education, your family influence, your dad, your mom, like I mean, they're on the one hand, they're very common sort of, you know, East European immigrants of that era. On the other hand, I think they were so attentive in your education in instilling confidence in you. And that really moved me, right? Can you say a bit more
It's
about
very
that?
true. And I think parents have a huge impact on that kind of thing. But I'll tell you something else, you know, something for years that I have done with very interesting results is when I'm interviewing a potential candidate to work in my lab, a student or a postdoctoral fellow, at some point during the interview, I will ask them the following question. So tell me, are you lucky? And you wouldn't believe the range of answers that I get. Anything from on one extreme, oh no, I'm not a lucky person at all. It's always raining on me. And I just, at the other extreme, others who say, oh yeah, I'm very lucky. It's been amazing how lucky I am. So which ones do you think I hire?
The lucky ones.
You betcha. I want the lucky ones. So what does that say? To me, luck and serendipity, for the most part, look, anybody can get hit by a car, but luck and serendipity has a lot to do with your attitude. So I often tell people, I go to the lab every day with the real expectation that something interesting is going to happen today. Now, 99% of the days I'm wrong. Okay. But once in a while, I'm right, and it's a complete surprise to everybody, including me. But I'm so busy expecting it that I'm much less likely to miss it, right? I'm watching for it every day. Where is it? Every time a student comes in with data, I'm expecting there's going to be something interesting here. And I think that sense of expectation and optimism that something good is coming, it's right around the corner. Can't see it yet, but I can feel it's coming. That kind of attitude increases the likelihood that when it really does show up, you won't miss it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think you should also get a Nobel Prize for physics because you identify the law of attraction.
Yes, exactly. And also seeing around corners.
Right, your vision. Thank you so much. Well, I know we're approaching the end of our time, and time flies. And thank you so much for all the wisdom. Again, we're only getting very, very kind of superficial snippets of your story. And again, you can find many of these narratives, recount stories, and many of the things we couldn't possibly touch in the short hour we have in the book. So make sure you get a copy of the book. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much again for your time, and do get a copy of the book. And I'm sure again you will just as myself thoroughly enjoy the book and enjoy all the insights coming out of it. Thank you again, Mr.
Thank you very
Professor
much
Lefkowitz.
for your time.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay.